Welcome to Europe Weekly, in a week dominated by the refugee crisis and the dramatic events on Bulgaria's borders. As EU leaders gathered in Brussels on Thursday, a man travelling with other migrants from Afghanistan was shot by border guards in Bulgaria's southeast. At the summit, heads of state and government agreed to negotiate an action plan to cooperate with Turkey and establish better control of the EU's external borders.
European Union leaders ending their summit in Brussels have agreed on an action plan with Turkey to try and stem the flow of migrants to Europe. On offer is a possible €3 billion in aid to improve the lives of 2 million Syrian refugees, to encourage them to stay put. There was also more talk about reforming the EU's asylum mechanism rather than on the issue of quotas. Chancellor Merkel said, "We discussed tonight what the member states can contribute, but we still need clear instructions for this. But generally there was a widely spread opinion that it's better to house the migrants closer to their home than financing them in the end in our own countries. So it was a very productive discussion."
Finanzieren und insofern war das eine sehr produktive Diskussion.
Besides the funds, Turkey gets a promise of re-energised talks on joining the bloc. The leaders also agreed to coordinate border controls to slow the influx of migrants crossing Turkey from Asia. Our reporter in Brussels said, "In the following years, relations between Turkey and Europe will be influenced highly by the migration crisis. The next step in this issue will be taken by the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who will visit Ankara this Sunday."
The issue of migration was not the only one on the agenda for EU leaders. The bloc is still waiting for concrete proposals from David Cameron ahead of a referendum in the UK on whether to leave the club. He promised an initial list in November that he will send to the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk. Meanwhile, the campaigns for In and Out have been officially launched.
Leaving the EU would hurt Britain's jobs and torpedo its global financial clout. The message from pro-Europeans as they launch their In campaign ahead of a referendum on UK membership. The campaign's headed up by a former boss of retailer Marks & Spencer.
Do we remain part of the largest free trade market on the planet, or do we walk away, perhaps risking jobs, creating uncertainty in our economy? Do we lead the world, or continue to lead the world by leading in Europe, or do we risk diminishing our influence on the world stage by turning our backs on Europe?
British Prime Minister David Cameron is seeking to renegotiate his country's relationship with the bloc. Opinion polls suggest voters are split, with the Greek debt crisis and the migrant influx thought to be encouraging some voters to go for a Brexit. Rival out campaigns have already been launched. One is supported by Nigel Farage, the head of UKIP. EU critics claim Britain's membership is holding back its economy. The referendum is due to take place before the end of 2017.
Iran and Russia remain supportive of Syria's Assad. EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini said there can be no political transition in the country without getting Tehran on board. The Deputy Foreign Minister of Iran spoke to Euronews about his country's involvement on the battlefield. Amid reports of a combined Syrian-Russian-Iranian ground offensive in Syria, EU officials have said that the West will need to talk to Tehran to broker an end to the conflict. EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini said earlier that both Russia and Iran will be partners in that process.
If we want the political situation to move inside Syria, and the political process to start immediately, we need to involve the actors that have an influence, a direct influence on the regime, and that is why both Russia and Iran are crucial.
Euronews spoke to Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdullahi, who was visiting Brussels on Tuesday.
Do you have boots in the ground?
We haven't sent a force of fighters to Syria. At the request of the Syrian government, we sent a number of military consultants with experience of fighting terrorism.
تعدادی مستشار نظامی متخصص در جنگ علیه تروریسم داریم.
And arms?
Whatever follows in Syria, whatever we do in that respect, is to weaken terrorist groups.
In their meetings on Monday, EU foreign ministers decided that there should be no future for President Assad in Syria. Now, how did you, or where did you place President Assad in your negotiations with Mrs. Mogherini?
We discussed very important points with Mrs. Mogherini, including the need to fight terrorism. But I should say that the decision about Assad staying or going should be made by the Syrian people. If rebel groups wish to take part in the political future of Syria, first they have to make clear their position vis-à-vis other terrorist groups. And then they have to join the political process in the country.
How do you describe your cooperation with Russia now, and how do you see the relationship with Russia in the future with regard to Syria?
Russia doesn't just intend to target groups fighting Assad, nor do we support this idea. We support Mr. Putin's decision to weaken terrorists in Syria.
How?
Our military consultants help the Syrian army and the authorities, and also the Russian authorities, in the event of a request from them. The 17th of July 2014, flight MH17 of Malaysian Airlines from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur disappeared from the radars whilst it was over the war zone of eastern Ukraine. A little later it was confirmed that the airplane had crashed and that 283 passengers and 15 crew members had all died. A few days ago, the Dutch Security Council published a report creating new tensions with Russia.
The Dutch Safety Board concludes that flight MH17 was shot down by a missile typically used with a Russian-made Buk system. The board published its final report into the Malaysia Airlines crash that killed all 298 people on board. Flight MH17 broke up over eastern Ukraine last July in territory held by pro-Russian rebels.
Flight MH17 crashed as a result of the detonation of a warhead outside the aeroplane, above the left-hand side of the cockpit. This warhead was of the 9N314M type, carried on the kind of missile that is installed on the Buk surface-to-air missile system. As a result of the detonation, the forward part of the airplane was torn off. The airplane broke up in the air. The wreckage came down in an area of about 50 kilometers in the eastern part of Ukraine.
Under flight crash investigation rules, the board is not authorized to apportion blame. It says Russia disagrees with the report's findings about the type of warhead and missile. The Dutch Prime Minister has asked Russia to cooperate with a separate criminal investigation.
Now let's take a look at next week's agenda. On Monday, there are more talks on the EU-US free trade deal. On Tuesday, EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini will go to Addis Ababa to discuss EU-Africa ties. On Wednesday, the centre-right EPP kicks off with its Congress in Madrid. And on Sunday, Poland goes to the polls for general elections. That's all for now. Have a nice week.
Εθνικών εκλογών. Εδώ ολοκληρώθηκε το Europe Weekly. Από μένα να έχετε μια όμορφη εβδομάδα.